Hi guys, this is Mrs. Gassler, and in this video we're going to talk about how to illustrate a substance by showing the particles. I'm not going to use any Cornell paper right now, but you're welcome to use whatever kind of paper you want anyway. But I do have kind of a blank page with some stuff written on it already that I'm going to kind of fill out. It doesn't have much on it, so you're going to be just fine. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to draw these different things, okay? Now, it might have been more sense to talk about the atoms first, so I'm going to start there. So what we're going to do when we draw the particles is we're just going to use shapes, kind of like we did in class. So we're going to use shapes, and they can be any kind of shape you want. You can also use letters or like a symbol. Anything that represents an atom is just fine. But what you need to know is that different atoms have different shapes. So if you draw a heart and another heart, then those have to be the same atom. And if you draw a heart and a circle, then those have to be different atoms. So you can use anything. I'm a big fan of circles and squares and stars and triangles, but you can also use dots. I've used a line. You can even use letters like K or P or whatever you'd like. Any of those would be fine, okay? But if they're the same shape, they're the same atom, and if they're different shapes, then they're different atoms, okay? That's a useful thing to know. Different atoms have different shapes, okay? Different shapes. Now, when we show a particle, what we do is we separate them out, okay? So if it's together in a clump, then we have them touching. So touching shapes equal one particle, okay? So if your circle and your square are touching, then that is one particle. If your triangle and your star are touching, that's another particle, but notice how they're not touching. So touching shapes equals one particle. So I like to call these kind of our chunks up here. Okay, see that whole chunk right there. And down here we have the pieces, and these might make up the chunks. Okay, it gets harder with dots and lines and letters, so you have to be careful using those. So use caution, but they can still help you understand what it is you're looking at. So when we draw our different substances, what we're going to be looking for is, whether it's a compound or an element or a mixture and those kinds of things. So it's going to be helpful for us to review a little bit about what that looks like. So the first difference, remember, is pure versus mixture. Okay, pure substances have identical particles. All the particles are the same. That means that we have to have the same chunks. All the chunks have to be the same. In a mixture, though, we have different particles. Okay, there's more than one particle, more than one different thing in the mixture, so we'll have different chunks. So if when you are looking at a picture you have different chunks, then that would be a mixture. But that's what we're looking for. So if you're going to draw it, that's what you're going to do too. This is basically working backwards from identifying things. And remember that an element, we're not really talking about the different kinds of mixtures, but remember in an element we have the same atoms, which means we're going to have the same shapes. And in a compound we're going to have different atoms, which means we're going to have different shapes. Okay? So let's look at what that's going to look like when we draw it. So I'm going to leave that kind of up there and draw on the bottom half here. So I've got a bunch of different examples that I want to draw today. Okay? So the first one is a pure element. Remember, pure means I have to have all the same chunks, and element means I have to have all the same atoms. I'm going to draw two examples that are both going to work here. So I'm going to pick circle. So if I draw a whole bunch of circles, oh look, I just drew a pure element. All the chunks are the same, and all the atoms are the same, okay? So that is a pure element. Now I can also draw my pure element like this. You see how I have two triangles stuck together? Okay? I can even draw it upside down too. Those particles are all the same. That makes it pure, and all the atoms, all the shapes that are there are the same. So that one is also a pure element. So that's how I'm going to draw that one. Now if I want to draw a pure compound, I have to have the same chunks again, but this time I've got to have different shapes stuck together. So I can pick any 2 or 3 or 5, however many, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to go easy though because I'm kind of lazy. I'm going to go circle, triangle. circle, triangle, circle, triangle. And I'm a big fan of writing 5 particles, because then I can tell pretty easily, and then I don't have to write too much. 3 would be fine. 2 maybe not enough, but 1 is definitely not, because I don't know if it's with anything else or not. Okay. So now I've got my pure elements and a pure compound here. I'm going to draw a mixture of elements. Okay, that means that I'm going to have different chunks, okay? So, and they have to be elements. So maybe I'll mix these 2 together. So I'll have a couple of those and a couple of these, okay? So there's one of them and there's the other. I don't have to circle them. I'm just trying to show you where they are here. But if I look at those, that's an element, okay? And that's an element. So now I have a mixture of elements when they're both in the same container. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with compounds. So I'm going to use a couple of these circle triangle guys. That's a good compound. And then maybe I'll make my other one square star. Okay, it doesn't really matter exactly what they look like, but notice how I have this one and I have this one. So those are my 2 different compounds in the same go. Now this last one that you might have to draw is a mixture of an element and a compound, and so I'm just going to take some of my elements and some of my compounds and mix them up. So here's an element, there's a good element, and then maybe we'll have a triangle star. Yeah, that looks like so good. So there's a mixture. I've got an element right there. Notice how they're not touching, so they're separate. And then there's my compound, and they are touching, so those guys are stuck together. Those 2 different pieces are stuck together. So that's pretty much it. This is also, if you can identify from the picture, then you can easily draw them. And if you can draw them, then you can easily identify them. So working both ways is a valuable skill. Let your teacher know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.